to the show.
What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Off the Mats Podcast. And for this episode, I want to welcome on a new guest. I know lately I've been kind of, recycling, some old guests, bringing them back, trying to play catch up with them. Some folks I haven't talked to in a while, and, you're just trying to touch base with them. But now I got to, kind of start reaching back out and getting some new blood in here. So for today's episode, I wanted to welcome on a gentleman that I encounter on Instagram because that's where I tend to meet most of the guests. You know me, I'm a social media hound, so I'm always over there fishing for people to talk to and making friends. So I want to welcome to the show today, 3-time IBJJF medalist, check. Strength coach specializing in grappling, check. And he kind of blends his competition experience with evidence-based strength training. Check. I want to welcome to the show today, Mr. James Deirmendjian. I almost had it. Deirmendjian.
No worries, Dante. Thanks so much for having me, man. I'm really excited to be on here today.
No, thank you for doing this. It's funny because through Instagram, I spy around, I think the limit of follows is like 7,500, and I'm at that limit. So it's a pool of interesting people to speak with and just information as well. So as I go through and I'm looking around, especially in the jiu-jitsu realm, it's kind of like, you know what, this is definitely this is kind of what steered the podcast. It's just seeing so many people and thinking like I like to talk to them. And I was like, well, let's just do it. So so thank you for doing this and making the time, because that's another thing too. Time is valuable, and anyone that wants to sit down and have a conversation with me, I greatly appreciate it. So thank you so much for that.
Absolutely, man. No, I'm excited. And I think as people we're looking to say something about the sport, about the art, we're looking to go public with our ideas, and we've got to band together, and we've got to, make use of each other's channels and resources so that, if we have an important message, it does get out there and people can get the benefit of it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the things I try to stress when it comes to conversations about jiu-jitsu, martial arts in general, and just physical health, is that, we have to have these discussions, not just have the discussions, but, good faith. A lot of times you'll have people just wanting to be right. It's not even a matter of being right or wrong. It's a matter of just getting information out there. And if you come across something that's a little different, be open to hearing it. So that's what I really enjoy about this is I love hearing what someone else has to say. And for me, I end up trying to implement it some way possible if I can into something that I'm doing. So selfishly, that's what this podcast is about too. This is these are like seminars for me, just free seminars. I sit down, then I play it back and take notes. But for my knowledge, at least, what I like to know just starting out is, what got you into martial arts and how long have you been training?
This is a fun story. And it's one that I really, really love to talk about. So when I was a kid growing up in, maybe you'll appreciate this, one of the most affluent, upper middle class, wimpiest white person neighborhood in Southern California, Agora Hills, Westlake Village. I had two brothers, who were just physical specimens. I was the middle brother, right? And we both of them were just natural athletes out of the womb, just beasts, and I was the brainier, more intellectual, and pretty nerdy, and kind of self-effacing, shy brother. By comparison, the two of them, I got bullied from the older and bullied from the younger. It was tough, coming up, but basically what ends up happening is, I start to play football as a young kid, and in middle school, my head's all up in Dungeons and Dragons and Star Wars and all the stuff, and just like most probably young American men who's exposed to American media, I've got all these dreams and fantasies about being that knight in shining armor, or that space marine, or that that Jedi Knight, and I want to put my physicality to the test. So I started with Pop Warner football, and I really enjoyed it. I kind of got pushed around my first year, but the second year I had some skills and I was able to start both ways and stuff, as a lineman. And going into my freshman year of high school, my older brother, who would kind of screw things up for himself, he made himself ineligible to play his senior year. And this guy was just a natural athlete, like 4'6", 40, like 210 pounds, 5'9", just like six pack without even trying, just out the womb. This guy was just a beast, and I was just, kind of nerdy and scrawny and skinny fat. And he discouraged me from playing football in high school. And, because he was upset about the coaches and how he'd become academically ineligible his senior year and all this kind of stuff. And so that kind of poisoned the well for me. And I remember being a young man in high school, freshman year at Agora High, and just being so isolated and so depressed and so anxious. I'd lost friends from middle school for whatever reason. I don't remember quite why. We kind of, went our separate ways. But I just remember like feeling like I'd taken a turn for the worse by not continuing on with football. And then there were all my friends who were playing football, and they were all having a great time and bonding together. And this is one of those things that, like, I think men need. For 300,000 years, right? We were tribal, species, right? We were, out on the tundra, in the jungles, on the savannas, hunting and gathering for like 300,000 years. And so that tribal togetherness and like war and the hunt and just sanctioned violence is like, it's a part of the fabric of our biology. Like there's no way around that. And I think especially for men who have on average like 10 times the average level of testosterone during puberty in particular than women, like it's just a terrible thing to not give young men an outlet for their aggression. And so one night I'm in this mopey place, 14 years old, and my older brother decided that he wasn't even trying to hang out anymore. Like he was off doing his own thing, doing all kinds of hood rat shit, whatever it was, probably doing drugs, getting involved with dumb things at the time. And, I went to a church function where the only state qualifying wrestler at the high school, it was his house, his parents' house. He was 18 years old at the time. And, everybody, all us kids, 14-year-old kids, we were hanging out with our church leader, grilling some meat, having a little swim. And Dylan, he comes out and he immediately just starts throwing bodies around. Just picking up the 14-year-old kids, throwing us in the pool, just like making a game of it. And I'm just like, oh shit, it's like that, Now, an old family friend had shown me a rear naked choke many years earlier. I knew no other jiu-jitsu moves besides that. And as Dylan is just like massacring these kids, just throwing them in the pool, pushing them over, just like, and it's just, it's just madness. I managed to get behind him in the pool, sink my hooks in, and get him in the rear naked and squeeze until he literally tapped. And this guy was like 190 pounds to my 150, 17, 18 years old to my 14. Like nobody saw that coming, So we're walking out the door and he's like, hey, you should come out for wrestling. And so I did, right? And I wrestled all 4 years. And that's basically how I got into the martial arts at first. That's kind of the origin story.
So yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned wrestling in there as the martial arts start point, because that becomes kind of a debate. I don't know if it's so much anymore. I haven't heard it too much lately, but a couple years back, you'd have people say, do you consider wrestling a martial arts? And I don't know. I would say, I mean, I don't even look at it as martial art as much as like, look, it's a physical, a combat sport,
Yeah.
So, what gets you in combat sports, what gets you into martial arts? I mean, wrestling being that stepping stone for you. And, especially with jiu-jitsu, because we have a lot of guys at our gym that, bounce between the two. We have a lot of guys during wrestling season that just ended not too long ago. Now they're flooding back to the mats. Once wrestling season starts back up, they disappear, they go over there. And all together, though, you're keeping that glue, intact. So, there's some differences. Obviously with wrestling, you don't want to be on your back, whereas jiu-jitsu, you're going to be able to fight off your back. But I think at the end of the day, no matter which one you really, do, it's always best to be the man on top. Like,
Yeah, and there's no serious jiu-jitsu coach who would disagree with that, right? Like, I trained all through 2023 with Danaher and the new wave, quote unquote, C team, as we call ourselves at Henry Gracie Austin. John would come in, rain or shine, teach at 10 a.m. And again at 6 p.m. 5 days a week. And then Saturday and Sunday, he taught a morning class. And so he was very dedicated to us, and this is after teaching the pros at Roca in the morning, usually like 8 a.m. And I think again at like 2 p.m. Right. So this guy taught like, practically 40 hours a week, probably more, and so dedicated, even to us nobodies, as it were, amateurs. And he would never disagree with the idea that, like, if you successfully pin somebody first, right? If you successfully can control them positionally, like, that's the proper order of operations to ultimately, especially at the higher levels, secure the submission eventually, right? I remember one day I had this fascination with this quarter jujikatami. It's, quarter armbar from when you're inside of someone's side control. And it's a staple in my game. I use it a lot. I throw it up as a threat. Most people, if you're good, you're never going to be caught by it, right? You'd have to be pretty sly about setting that up to catch that on someone who's not like a white or a blue belt, or, a purple belt who's not paying attention, as it were, right? And so let's just say, and John taught it one day, and I was like, oh, cool. And like, I wonder if he's going to teach a bigger system behind it, because I love this move and I use it all the time. Even if it's just kind of like an opener and a setup and as a feint into something else. And, I asked him, okay, can you use it here? Can you use it there? Because he did like powwow time with us after every practice, which was super cool, right? Very generous, obviously. And I remember him just kind of like smiling and laughing at me. He's like, man, you're inside control. Why don't you get to a better position first before you try and sub somebody? And so he teach the move, right? And he taught a very wide variety of moves, from low percentage to high percentage. But he never had any illusions that, okay, this thing has its proper place in the repertoire, and it's not by any means a substitute for taking the back, taking the mount, getting to side control, getting to a truly dominant position, and then, working for your sub.
Yeah, that's one of those things too, that when you're looking at a grappler, especially in those earlier belts, white belt, blue belt, as a blue belt myself, I still say, hey, I'm still a baby belt, I'm still learning. But, there are a lot of times though where, it has to be stressed that, position over submission. You get folks that they'll get to, to a point where they're not completely secure, and they're trying to work for the crazy submission, the wild eye submission. And it's like, if you can get the back, you got the position, it's only a matter of time before you're going to get the submission. And, it's fascinating, just hearing that, especially like, hearing Donna here, kind of going over the moves and stuff. And it was like, but this is no substitution, make sure, just, go for the thing, go for the dominant position, at all costs. But, it's good to have those things there too. But and I'm working on it myself.
Yeah.
Like, I'm always working on it. Like, there are times I forget, like, oh yeah, wait a minute. I'm in a dominant position right now. You can't do anything. Like, duh.
For sure.
So when you started wrestling, you say you wrestled all 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
what was that experience like, just going through those years, like, first starting, your first competition, your first match, in wrestling all the way through. And then did you go beyond that? Like, did you wrestle any in college or anything?
I did like some club intramural stuff in college, which was no big deal. I was at USC, so they didn't have a wrestling team. But in terms of my experience in high school with wrestling, there's a really good story there that I'd love to share as well. That I think kind of became the ghost for me in my head that made me wake up one day and decide I want to pursue jiu-jitsu and to see if I can become a world champion, right? As a 3-time world medalist now, we're very close, right? And I am proud that, I'm doing this at the adult level at 41. I am disappointed that I've not been promoted to purple belt after 5 belt promotion ceremonies as a 4-stripe blue. But at the end of the day, what can I do about that? But see if I can tolerate hunkering down at a gym for more than a year and, see what happens. Right. Because I've moved around and I've moved around a lot because I've wanted to learn what I've wanted to learn. Right. And I've wanted to learn from whom I wanted to learn from. And I wanted to try different things. Right. So, I'm a very big non-believer in this kind of confused idea of loyalty that, this whole like Crianche thing. I think that has no place. Especially here in the United States, like away from Brazil, where we value freedom, where we value, individual sovereignty, those kinds of things. But back to the high school story. So by the time I was in my senior season, I'd gotten pretty good, right? So I think I finished my senior season like 24-13 or something like that, with 22 or 23 wins by fall, right? So again, I'm a finisher. That's the way I like to fight, right? I like to go for subs. And, as the anecdote about Danaher and the quarter juji should let I like to go for wild and crazy subs sometimes. I like to really go for it and to take big risks. And that's also the kind of life that I like to live, right? It doesn't always land me in those secure positions, but I, I'm proud of myself for having gone for it a lot of the time, Sure. And I want to encourage other people to take big risks and to be daring, so that's part of the reason I think behind my style, which, sometimes has that variance with this control before submission style. But so I'm in high school, senior season, we go to Tournament of Champions. I was seated pretty well. And this is the biggest state level wrestling tournament in the state of California, every year in the CIF. So it's put on by Torrance High School. I don't know if they still do it, North Torrance, but they invite something like 60 schools, right? And I'd pinned my first 2 guys my first day, right? And I will never forget seeing, after my second match and pinning my guy, and my coach was all up in arms because I almost got beat, but I came back and I did what the team often called pulling a Deirmendjian, because my thing was I'd come within inches of losing and then dramatically turn the match around and pin the guy, right? I did that so many times. So this young, inner city kid comes up to me and he's like, he just saw my match and he's like, "Hey man," he's like, "So what weight class are you in?" I'm like, 215s. He looks at me, he slaps me some skin. He's like, "I'll see you in the finals, baby." And I look at him, I'm like, who is this guy? Who does he think he is? Finals at this tournament? And I watched him dance or I watched him wrestle, and his wrestling style was very expressive, very dance-like, falling to one knee, coming up, he looked like he belonged again, on a dance floor, but he was winning, and I was like, okay, this is interesting. The next day we come back. I face the Masters champion the previous year, right? Man, Masters in CIF is a tournament that's it's after divisionals, so it's on the way to the state championship, right? I think it was league, sectionals, Masters, state, right? He was the Masters champ the previous year, and I was like, I have no chance against that guy. Sure enough, he pinned me. The next day, right, we come back. I think it was a 3-day tournament. Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And I'm seeing Alan Kennett, the kid who told me that he'll see me in the finals. I lost another match and got knocked out the tournament. I ended up like being in the 9th through 12th bracket out of 60 schools. So not terrible, but, still didn't podium. And Alan, not only did Alan win that tournament as he predicted, right? He went to the finals, beat the other guy. He ended up being the California state champ at 215. He had dropped down from heavyweight the previous year. And he ended up taking second at American Nationals. Now, for high school wrestling, it's tough to overstate how big of a deal that is, right? Because like American Nationals and the IBJJF, I have 3 of those medals. The brackets were like nothing, right? There's literally like nobody in them, to be honest, right? World's different, right? Worlds, you see 20, 30, 40, 50, sometimes, up to 100-man brackets, right? But like the number of meat grinder tournaments that guy had to get through to get there, right? And take second in nationals is so impressive, right? And I remember finding that out and being like, man, Alan Kennett believed in me more than I believed in myself. This guy who ended up being such a good wrestler, right? Saw what I was doing and thought it was good. And my own self-doubt held me back, right? My own poor estimation of my abilities, right? Hindered my performance when he thought that I was good enough to hang with him. And so later on in life, suffering from similar challenges of self-doubt and self-image, that's when I really got back into jiu-jitsu and decided to get on this world championship grind, and this was 3 years ago. And I had trained previously and gotten my blue belt 4 stripes for about 2-3 years, maybe 4 years, say up until 2011, but I'd stopped for 10 years. And I only got back on it really in like 2022, late 2021. And so it's been the past 3 years in a row that I've, become a 3-time world and national medalist.
So I look at that and I was just hearing that there's something to that, when you look at, like you said, you had that self-doubt and he believed in you. He saw something. And I don't know, there's a charm to that, as the receiver of hearing that, because it's almost like that boost, and sometimes you might not feel that boost right away. You might not, it doesn't click. And then, there's just that day, that one day you're out there working, and then, you have that memory, you remember, and it's like, wait a minute, if this dude saw what, that potential in me, let's find it. Let's bring that potential out that dude saw in me, because, this dude, finished second, and he was expecting to see me in the finals when we're out there. So, he saw, like, you just didn't catch it just yet. And I think that's really cool. I think it's awesome because you eventually tap into it and you're grinding, you're moving. And like you said, you're the kind of guy that you take chances. And it's weird because when people don't take chances, you never know. We always sit around talking about, I could have, I would have, I should have, but didn't.
Yeah. 100%, man. 100%.
So, like when you're competing, what's the mindset like for you? Do you, like you said, you like to take chances, do you have any nerves going into stuff like that? Or, you're just like, what? It is what it is. Let's see.
It's always nerves, right? Always nerves in some way and to some degree. And it's funny because some of my best performances ahead of time, these are the thoughts that run through my head. Why am I doing this? This is stupid. I'm too old. This cost me money. I could hurt myself. I could be doing something else. This is crazy. These are all the thoughts that are going through my head right before I step on the mats. I remember asking Nicholas Mergali when I was training, at Henry Gracie Austin, because he ran the morning gi class, 6:30 a.m. And he's a great teacher, right? Super chill guy, very, very generous, like John. And I remember asking him one day, I was like, Nicholas, like, what do you do for mental preparation before your matches? And he looks at me, and he's just like, just train, nothing, like he's saying there's no like specialized type of mindset, anything you can do, and I don't know that I agree with that. But as far as like what I do that helps me to win, I've yet to really dial that in. I think I've had some success with meditation, I think, in terms of just keeping myself regulated, right? Because that's the biggest thing that causes problems, is over arousal or under arousal, right? So I'll give an example. The adult worlds last year, right? I'm in the bullpen and I come out for my first match, right? Went really well. I didn't expend too much energy. I pulled guard. I kind of didn't really have a game plan, but I pulled guard right away. I ended up getting the guy into a K guard position, sweeping him through and catching like a Woj lock, right? A crossbody straight ankle lock that I finished with like a belly down armpit finish. And that entire sequence, like I hadn't planned it. I hadn't thought about it. It just kind of happened in the moment, right? And I was really stoked on it. But I come up and I walk back to the bullpen, right? And they give me my 7 minutes. And all these dudes, all these referees and these ring coordinators are looking at me. They're like, let's see how far the old guy's going to go, So I'm the only person in my 40s in the bracket fighting these 25-year-olds, right? I walk back from the bullpen, right, when I get called for my next match. And I'm going to tell you right now, Dante, it's that walk from the mat to the bullpen and back that is the most anxiety-inducing, the most like consternation creating thing you can do, right? Because you go from being totally focused on the mat in front of you and the match, right? You walk to a noisy bullpen with a bunch of athletes who are also anxious, just moving around. They got all their anxious energy. You have to absorb it, and then you have to walk back, right? Just that walk is like, I swear to God, if I could figure that thing out, I would have been a world champion 3 times by now. I know that's like that little piece of like managing the anxiety. And it's so bad that, so I ended up subbing my other guy, my next guy, and my third match, this guy, no clue who he was, 25 years old, former D1 wrestler from Colombia, had just graduated. This guy just came in and like, I didn't see it coming, basically smashed me like a Mack truck, endorsed me, right? And I was out, and that was my third place finish, 2 submission wins and 1 loss there, and a bye early on because I seeded well. But I will say, like, this kind of anxiety that comes from having to walk to the bullpen and then come back in the IBJJF, right? It's so bad that like when I was at Masters World last year, same sort of thing, right? Finished my first guy with a quick arm bar, right? I am standing ringside waiting for my next match. And I'm so like not having it with the back and forth that I say, hey, to the ring coordinator, say, hey, I'm pretty sure I'm up next, right? Like, can you just let me stay here? Not make me walk back to the bullpen. He's like, well, I don't know if you're going next. I'm like, I'm pretty sure it's me, like I'm seated third here out of 40 people. So just let me stay, right? Because I'm the next fight. He's like, well, you have to go back. And I'm like, because I don't know. I'm like, all right. So I do it. I go. And they're supposed to give you 7 minutes, right? I've already spent maybe 3 or 4 there, ringside or mat side. I get to the pen, and I told him ahead of time, I'm like, listen, man, if I go back to the bullpen and you guys call me back immediately, I'm going to be unhappy about that, right? That's not going to sit well with me. So I go. Within 30 seconds, the ring quarter comes like, James, you're up. Same mat, same everything. And just that distraction from keeping yourself in this like regulated, focused state, just that, like, I knew it affected my performance the next match, right? I got caught in a triangle. The sub wasn't on, but like I was stuck, and I tapped and I was done, right? And so there goes another $1,000 Vegas trip, right? But these are kind of the highs and lows that if you're going to compete in the IBJJF, that you have to be willing to deal with, right? Because there's no money involved. They only really promote people who are like, who they deem to be, I don't know, whatever it is, like probably athletes who already have big followings and stuff like that, athletes who can get them more prestige, right? Mm-hmm. And so, but in terms of like the mindset thing, I honestly think at this point, and this may be something kind of radical to say, but it's important because other people are saying it too. Until and unless I can figure out how to really monetize this and how to make up for my losses here, right? And how to get like the finances squared away in light of the fact that each of these trips ranges from $500 to $1,000 every time I go. Like, I think that's like kind of one of the big mindset pieces, because I know as a blue belt that like precious few people care, right, about what I'm doing. I don't have endorsements or sponsorships. It's all on me. And so that weekend could have been spent working on my business, right? That weekend could have been spent expanding the operation, right? Securing my future financially, right? Being more responsible. And so I think that's another piece to this thing as to why you see a lot of people mentally fizzle out of competition. It's that they realize, like I don't know if you saw Denny, I think it's Prokopoulos, this 10th Planet guy who recently spoke on this. They realize, like he just said, he said, he would never compete and pay to do so on principle. And he addressed everyone who does that, myself among them, and said, you guys are all hoes and you're being pimped. And he's 100% in so many ways. He's right. Like the show can't run without us, but we're dumping money into chasing this dragon, right? The lot of us, all of us who aren't hiding at the highest level, black belt adult. So I think that's kind of an underappreciated piece of like the mindset thing, which is like, if athletes knew they were being better taken care of, if they didn't literally have to go into debt in so many instances or work Uber or whatever it is to show up and compete, right? If they got some prize money when they won, I have maybe 10 gold medal finishes in the IBJJF, with, brackets with a number of people in them, not huge brackets, but, fighting adult, whatever, some tough guys that I've beaten, if I could even just recoup on my tournament fees for those finishes, like that would have me, a lot less conflicted about, okay, how much longer can I do this for? Right. When am I going to get my break? Right. And then the politics with the belt system, right? That can be incredibly discouraging, so, I think that's kind of an underappreciated piece of like the competition mindset thing, which is like, if you're not independently wealthy and you don't have cash to burn, it's going to be in the back of your mind at all times. Like, why am I doing this? Like, does this make sense? Right. Who is this helping?
Oh, and it's like you said, though, the show can't run without, you as the athletes. And, you always kind of, think back to, it's like, how did this start? When did it start? Where did it start? When did it become this thing now where it's a foundation with momentum? And you start looking, it's like, wait a minute, we've been doing this long enough. And at what point do they start saying, hey, we can start paying the athletes at least something, like you said, at least recoup your registration fee, at least.
Yeah.
It's like you start looking at that. And the conversation comes up every couple of years. I see it on social media popping around, and it's one of those things where you hear it, you're like, yeah, I feel you, and then it disappears.
Yeah.
People just stop talking about it.
Everybody's back to business as usual, chasing the dragon, chasing this dream of being a world champion, quote unquote. And like, it's funny. I'm at Legion now, training, with Keenan Cornelius' team. Mm-hmm. And really, the reason I went there after leaving Hunter Gracie Austin, going back to an old Gracie Baja gym, having a bad experience there in terms of like coaches not showing up for me at Worlds and not getting promoted to my purple for the third belt promotion ceremony that I was there as a 4-stripe blue. And then by then a 3-time world medalist. And by then the only person at the gym, even in their coaching staff, even amongst adult competitors, to place at the adult worlds that year. They claimed they had 900 members, right? So like I came to Legion because for months I'd seen their advertisements, and I heard Keenan's story about how he'd kind of been through the ringer of all the cult dynamics and, Andre Galval, just kind of treating him like a bitch or whatever. And him just showing up late to practice, being your kind of typical autistic jiu-jitsu guy, like not really caring about this, not really caring about that, but just, he's in it for himself, which is like, we all have to be in it for ourselves. Right. We're not like doing this unless you're like a defensive tactics instructor or you're running your own school, that's affiliated, or you're on the payroll. It's like you have to consider your own best interests, with jiu-jitsu, right? That's the whole point. In fact, granted, you don't want to be an asshole, but I came to Legion because they're like, hey, we don't bow to the picture of the dead guy on the wall. You don't call us professor, right? You don't call us master. You can get up and go pee anytime you want, get up and get water anytime you want, right? We're not trying to shame you, and when I talked to Miha on the phone before moving down here, he was like, listen, like we have a belt promotion system that factors in attendance, it factors in competition performance, and we pride ourselves on making it fair, right? And I don't think any other place would even say that, right? Because every other place, it's pretty clear, especially like the Gracie Bajas and the McDojo type gyms. Attendance times dues paid is what gets you the belt, right? And this has led to a really interesting situation where, I'm a blue belt who can make many, many, many black belts cry and question the meaning of their lives because, like they're supposed to be able to beat me, right? But they, maybe they're hobbyists usually, right? Typically, right? But like whatever they've achieved for themselves in the art, doesn't hold a candle, to what I've learned and what I've achieved, so many. So, but that's the McDojo effect, right? When the belt starts to be more about, more a tool for client retention, and it's withhold to punish or withhold to extract more dues, right? Then you have this thing where it doesn't mean skill anymore. And is that honest? Does anybody want to really be a part of that at the end of the day?
Yeah, there was a gym the very first gym that I ever visited, because I wasn't really sure. I knew what jiu-jitsu was. I watched MMA and everything, and I was a big fan. I went to a gym with a friend, and he had been training there for a little while, and he had mentioned to me eventually, he was basically saying, if you've been, training for 2 years, attendance base, you're going to get your blue belt, just off of that alone. And I remember thinking, at the time, I was like, oh, okay. I mean, I guess that's cool, not realizing though, you could be there for 2 years and not learn shit.
Yeah.
Like, because when I eventually did find the gym that, I was going to be training at, I was only training once per week for the first year. And then the second year, I started picking up a little bit more. My schedule changed. So I was like, okay, I'm able to, train a little bit more, So if we're going off that logic from the first gym, I get promoted off of, training 1 day per week for, a year, and then picking up some more, days. It's like in 2 years, I know I was not a blue belt. Like, I was still getting, just, making, silly white belt mistakes, still spazzing a little bit, using strength, it was about, that 2.5 year mark where I started it started to smooth over. And, my coaches saw that too. It's like, okay, now we see it moving. I think, it was still another year even after that, where it's like, okay, we think you're ready. And that's just the thing. It's like, if you're going based off of, attendance, again, anyone could come and scan their card, and just, sit around. But if you're clocking hours, you're staying the extra reps afterward, kind of drilling the technique a little bit, because I always find that for myself, when we would learn something that day, it's like, okay, if I don't drill a little bit after class, or now I record my round, or not just my rounds, but like when coach is instructing, I'm like, hey, is it all right if I, record this? Because I have to look at, I'm a, I have to look at it and then physically do. I can't just like write the notes down and like, okay, I think I got this, or remember it. But, like over time, you got to put in the work to get there, not just, pay your tuition, scan your card, and, say, okay, I got this belt now, take the pictures, do the things, wear the school gi, and, wear my belts and all that is, especially if you're not competing, I mean, and also kind of back to, one thing you're saying too, is like, you got to do for you, especially like a lot of athletes, that are, you're coming up and you're doing your thing. You don't have a gym, you don't have like instructionals or anything. So you got to do for you in the moment to get yourself, it's like, somebody's like, hey, we want you to do this. So it's like, well, I got to work on me,
Yeah.
I got to make sure like I'm able to give you, what you're asking for. I don't think people recognize that enough, where it's like, just throw them in the fire. You'll figure it out. And some do, but it's like, at least like let the man, work on himself. Like you get your medals, get your experience out there on the mats, go out there and body slam, some folks, and let them know like, look, I'm here and I'm here to make a name, make a statement. So definitely do for you.
Yeah, I mean, it brings to mind the question of like, how am I going to pay my dues? For me, especially as a strength coach who drives business in part through my competition performance, right? That's a big driver of sales for me when I do it upright, right? And when I can find the people who want what I also have and who are serious about it, right? I've been going to these like time left dinners. It's an app, for people who just want to like get together and meet new people every night at like a dinner in your city, And every time I introduce myself, I say, yeah, I'm a strength coach for military, law enforcement, and jiu-jitsu athletes, and I'm a 3-time world and national medalist jiu-jitsu athlete. It's like, everybody's head turns like, whoa, and there's this kind of shock and awe thing. But then I'm always kind of laughing inside, like, what if they really knew all the bullshit that I put myself through, to be able to say that? What if they knew that there's, 5 different belt ranks and 7 different weight classes and 7 different masters divisions, right? And there's literally like several hundred, or thereabouts, over 100 at least world champions every year in the IBJJF, right? It all feels like a giant kind of marketing gimmick. at the end of the day. And so the question becomes, to all these gyms, especially like the GB gyms where they hold you back if you haven't paid them, long enough. If your tenure hasn't, if you do anything they don't like, they hold you back, right? If you're yourself, they hold you back, right? If you're too much yourself and you don't fall in line and drink the Kool-Aid enough, they hold you back. The question becomes like, okay, how the fuck am I going to pay you guys, right? Like, how am I going to continue to pay you guys?
Yeah. I think that's one of those things too. It's like you said, being yourself. It's like, I think, there's some gyms that they want you to be the robot. They want you to be just another cog in the machine. And, then there are places that let, they, especially with the help of social media. It's like you either fall into one or two categories. The gym that's like, ooh, we prefer you don't say that or say this.
Sure.
You're representing us. Or there are the other ones that are like, look, man, shine. Let your personality, because that's your strength, is your personality. Let it fly and get what you got to get. Within the boundaries of not doing anything illegal or anything, or hurting no one, but. That's the important thing too, is like you said, as a strength coach, that's a big part of that is your knowledge, but to draw people in too with the knowledge is like, your personality. You got to be yourself. You can't be in the cog or be a cog in the machine where it's like just doing what everybody else is doing, because it's like, okay, you're just another puppet just moving about. How do we know that what you have to offer, is any different than the next guy, over here? What makes you stand out? And that personality is so key.
100%, man. And unfortunately, I think, the BJJ movement, a lot of these guys, who are enterprising entrepreneurs, they come up from Brazil, and a lot of them are very savvy. And they understand that there's this kind of void to fill in the American soul. And that, a lot of us, like, we're kind of a post-religious, like secular society on the whole, right? People want to be in touch with some kind of greatness. They pursue martial arts because there's some kind of nameless greatness or excellence or something that they're longing for that feels absent from life, and they see, a lot of these guys, they see these savvy businessmen, like how easy that is to exploit in terms of like the validation that like they effectively make you pay for, right? They see that there's like so much money to be made by selling, effectively a cult brand or something that's like, jiu-jitsu like becomes this thing that's almost like, it's almost like a pay for religion, right? And hence the accusations of cult dynamics, right? And these guys understand that, and they exploit it, right? And that's just the truth, right? And we know it, and we're talking about it. We're aware of it, but there's still so many people who accept it and think it's normal and think it's acceptable, or just don't care to fight back against it. But really, this kind of stuff is what cripples the art at the end of the day, in terms of like not permitting a proliferation of different styles, not permitting a proliferation of different techniques, not permitting different sorts of people, to be involved with the art, who express themselves in different ways, whether it's, neurodivergent folks or LGBTQ plus folks or whatever, it may be. But there's this kind of insistence on conformity and adherence that, to some doctrine or dogma or set of rules, or this obsequiousness to the master that, I think especially like GB schools can find themselves infected with, that at the end of the day, there's one thing behind all that, and it's really insidious, and it's just profit motive,
Mm-hmm.
It's just the insecurity of the instructors and the school owners.
like I wonder sometimes too, because it is one of those running jokes. We're all aware of it. It's not. It's no secret. I've made the joke on my other podcast. Talking about what's a cult that doesn't seem like a cult. And my buddy would say all these other things like, how about jujitsu? And he doesn't train, and he looked at me funny, and I was like, it's kind of culty in some places. And then I oftentimes wonder though, with some folks is like with the jokes about it, and it's like you see it, but then there's also that thought of like, nah, it's not me though, not me at all. Meanwhile, you walk in, you bow to your coaches, and you call them master, and this like you have to wear our patch, and
Yeah,
all
that
the
kind of
weird
shit.
stuff, and it's like you're not in a cult. That's like I'm no expert on cults, but I'm pretty sure that's a cult. And not for nothing, I like when I watch horror movies and stuff. I'm obsessed with cults. I'm fascinated by it because it's like, how do I avoid it? And then I end up doing jujitsu. It's like, let me watch my surroundings. Like, oh yeah, by the way, I gotta pay that tuition, and make sure I go put on my uniform.
I don't have a problem with business owners charging not just fair market, but what they feel they're worth at the end of the day. That's fine, right? A business owner is at the end of the day the person who decides, with some equilibrium from fair market pricing, what their service is worth, what they ought to sell it as, right? And the market will let them know ultimately if people are going to buy, right? That said, it's not so much to me that money is involved. It's the manner in which it's extracted, right? Like the uniform policies. Again, Legion doesn't have one, which is a big attraction. The serious gyms in Austin, Texas, don't have strict uniform policies, right? Whether it's Fight Factory or 10th Planet Austin or, New Wave RGA, nobody cares, right? You're there to learn jujitsu, right? But all these other places, they come out to the suburbs, and these, quote unquote professors find themselves with a $1.5 million mortgage on a home. And now they're trying to get all clever and crafty about how they can extract as much money from their customers, right? So that they can live their lavish lifestyles, right? And support themselves and then some, and that's the beef that I have with the money thing. It's not the fact that they're charging X amount of dollars for the service. They can charge whatever they want, right? That's on them. But when it's like, oh, you have to pay for this $220 gi that was made in Pakistan and cost us $30, but we slapped a patch on it. Okay. Oh, you have to, not use any other kind of gi. Okay. Oh, you have to, whatever the rule is, the exclusivity, like the GB,
Belt promotions,
all that, right? All that, you have to, you can't cross train, all this kind of stuff, right? What it shows is this kind of deep rooted insecurity and the sense of scarcity that, to my mind, that's the thing that poisons any kind of relationship, whether it's a business relationship or a personal one, right? If someone's constantly coming to you with, oh, I've got this rule so I can get more out of you than, you even bargained to give me, and you have to engage in it, because I have power over you, like, is that attractive, right? Who's that attractive to? Like somebody who's desperate, and who's willing to devalue themselves.
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of that lock in, make you exclusive. Like you mentioned, no cross training.
Yeah,
and I didn't know that was a thing. Until I started talking to more people on social media. And I don't know that I engage with anyone who can't cross train. I don't know that I do, but I see comments and posts around. I'm just curious. I was like, well, why? It's always a weird thing to me. It's like, look, man, again, we're all out here learning jiu-jitsu, It's an art that we're partaking in and we're gaining. And like you said, maybe it's bruising their ego. Maybe it's making them feel a certain kind of way. Their folks go somewhere else and then maybe they like it a little bit better over there. Maybe they're scared. I don't know.
100%, man. I think that's what it boils down to. And really, I think we're seeing less and less of the whole no cross training thing because it's been outed for what it is on the internet, which is like, possessiveness, jealousy. Like in what other sport or martial art is this like really a thing? Maybe other martial arts, but in jiu-jitsu, it's notorious with this idea of crionche, which really just stems back to like, what's it called? There's it's like this issue, social issue in Brazil, where it's not patriarchy, but like it's not paternalization. There's some P word that I'm digging for that is a really kind of unsavory thing that's part of like business and cultural dynamics in Brazil in particular, right? And it'll come to me once the show's over, I promise you.
It always does. So yeah, like I think ultimately, again, at least the way I look at it all is like, look, man, we're here to do jiu-jitsu, we're here to learn, and better ourselves. I always say, like, look, we're all here for the same thing. It has to be better than what we were yesterday. And anything outside of that is just you're making it weird. So
for sure.
One thing I wanted to ask about too was being a strength coach, and a connection there, because you mentioned growing up, you're the scrawny kid, the middle brother, just kind of pushed around back and forth, and I would imagine, as I'm about to say, what got you there is like, well, the obvious is like, look, you're the scrawny guy, but what kept you motivated and driven? Because I've encountered those those cats growing up, and it's like at some point they just say, hey, I'm the bookworm, I'm the nerd, I don't need to do this, I'm just gonna outwit them now and invent something, versus like, nah, let me go get big and be smart, because that's the move. So what kept that drive for you?
Well, so when I did get back into wrestling, it was a short time thereafter that I also got back into football, which was like my sophomore year of high school. And I think one day in like my freshman PE class, like we basically had like a bench press competition. I remember like I repped out 135 for seven reps. And a couple of my peers were just like, whoa. And I was like, okay, and I thought to myself, okay, like we've got this weight room here. And I noticed how like, other guys like appreciate like a strong guy. And I was like, okay, let me, and I thought to my, to my brothers, and I thought to, wrestling, and I thought to football, and I was like, all right, like there's potential here. I don't have to stay stuck where I'm at. And, I thought about my younger brother, Ryan, my older brother, John, and I was like, do I want to just let these guys, be stronger than me and more athletic than me? And I thought to myself, hell no, like, hell no. Like, and so I was in that weight room from my sophomore year to my senior year, as much time as they would let me be in it. I was there at least, probably 4 or 5 days a week on average. And there was no way I wasn't going to get myself as strong as I possibly could be. Right. And that was kind of the genesis of that, lifelong passion for strength and fitness.
Nice. And, along that path, at what point did it click to you that, because you obviously there's the connection between, your sports and being strong, but then also now developing program for other athletes. At what point did that become a thing for you? kind of helping others with it.
Yeah, I think as soon as I started to get into it and see some results as a teenager, I was like trying to pass off programs to my friend. Oh, have you tried this? Oh, I got this out of this magazine, right? But it wasn't until later, in my 20s, I think that I started to take it serious and think, okay, like maybe this is something I could do as a career. And that didn't become a real thing. I think, I bounced around different commercial gyms throughout my 20s and early 30s, and, did other things with, for money, worked private security, worked in law, in fact, in patent law as a office admin, and then ultimately a patent agent, right, which was cool. But it was when I realized that, I saw a Facebook ad 7 or 8 years ago, and I realized that I could sell my own service at a handsome enough rate and support myself entirely on my own, not have to like be abused by any of these like corporate chain gyms, where literally like if I were to go and work at like a 24-hour fitness right now, they would literally start me at 20 an hour as a trainer, which is like, what, like with 20 years of experience, like that was the same rate you guys were charging 20 years ago, right? And so it's so exploitative, but when I saw that I could charge, gym club rates for my service on my own, I got into this marketing program for independent trainers. That's when it really clicked that this was like a path to freedom for me.
Good. Yeah, my buddy, when we were younger, I took exercise science and kinesiology briefly. He went all the way through and finished school and everything. And I remember going with him. We had to go. I can't remember what it was, but like we had to go visit different gyms basically and kind of evaluate them. And I remember we went into a Bally's Fitness out here in Ellicott City, Maryland. And I remember after walking out of there, my buddy goes, everything that I just learned from them is they're not even worried about you as, someone lifting weights and trying to get stronger. They're just trying to sell you products in that building. Yeah, it was like everything they're trying to do is like they're promoting, this different shake or this different pill. And oh yeah, by the way, we got personal trainers over here too. And it's like, it just, is just this thing that didn't seem genuine. So, I'm happy to see individuals like yourself. I've had, a number of strength coaches on the podcast, and it's always interesting because, I hear from you all and it's like, yeah, you're getting genuine, like heartfelt, like, you guys are like trying to help us. You're not trying to sell us a product other than your knowledge and better us.
100%. And the vast majority of my clients at this point they're first responders, they're military, law enforcement, or jiu-jitsu athletes. I like working with these people, right? It's not just some like, person from an affluent neighborhood again who I can't stand dealing with because of how entitled and disconnected from like reality they are, caught up in whatever white collar profession they've been working in, for however long, and how much they've let their bodies decay, but I work with people who are in the shit, who really get their elbows greasy, who mix it up. And I love working with them because they're gritty and they're fun and they have a good sense of humor on the whole, and they don't take shit personally. And when you can actually tap into their motivation, they're so driven, right? I've worked with a lot of Marines, man, like you tell them to do anything and they will like bash their head into a wall to get it done, like until it's done. And they get such good results, right? I've had Marines like put on 20 pounds of lean tissue in like 4 or 5 months, right? To the point where I was like, oh, I didn't know that program could do that. Thank you, Marine, right? Like, thank you for validating my offer. Now I know that like all these people who aren't doing well are probably just bitches, like they're not actually doing the workout with intent, I've worked with so many interesting people. I got a guy into and through the Secret Service Academy at the age of 36. And again, guy was so determined, and really, getting him to achieve that goal, which was such an elite and a cool goal for someone his age, it was a labor of love, right? I just had a Marine officer who for 3 years, he's 51 now, he could not complete his combat fitness test. And the reason he couldn't complete it, being one of a handful of Marine Corps infantry officers who's stayed in service as long as he has, right, is his knee is super banged up, right? 33 years of service, totally understandable that things would go this way, in the combat arms. It's not an easy life. After 8 months of us working together, he completed that combat fitness test for the first time in 3 years, and he scored a first class on it in spite of his knee, right? And so when I get to know I'm a part of that sort of thing, another client of mine rehabbed his ACL to the point where when he went back to his surgeon, she's like, okay, keep doing what you're doing. No surgery now, When I get to know about this, that my care is affecting change in the world, it's intensely gratifying, And it would be this way if it was any other profession, if I was a lawyer or a psychologist, it doesn't matter, I just happen to be a fitness professional. But my goal is to change people's lives, enhance their quality of life, and help them to feel better about themselves and their futures, and enjoy their present more, and enjoy like being in their bodies and feeling strong and powerful and capable through this medium of fitness coaching.
I love hearing that, that they like just talking with you, I can hear that, you're like everything you do, you put your all into it. It's like, if I were to ask you, hey, whatever it may be on the mats, in the weight room, whatever it may be, I feel like I'm going to get like a full honest answer, and not just a run around. That's like, kind of like, we don't know. We're going to figure it out. Like, and if you don't know, you strike me as the kind of guys like, look, I don't know, but we're going to get there together. We'll figure it out. And dude, that can't stress enough how important that is. And not just, strength and conditioning, but just in anything, because like I mentioned earlier, there are too many people that just want to be right. And it's not even a matter of like, they'll say anything just to sound right. I mean, I joke with my buddy a lot. I'll say like, dude, I just make things up sometimes. I just make it up with confidence. But thank you for, just being that, because we need more of that. We need more individuals that just give a damn, because there's not enough.
I appreciate that, man. And I know, like, on the internet and on social media, you see all these fitness influencers. The majority of them are on performance enhancing drugs, which as of now, I don't do, they have these insane physiques, ripped to the bone, six packs, veiny. They have, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of followers. And they have clever copywriting and good marketing and ad campaigns and all this shit. And they ain't coaching nobody. You know what they're doing? They're selling the kind of shit that you were talking about at the Bally's. Shakes, pills, detoxes, vitamin C packets. None of this shit is transformative at all. Not a whit of it, right?
No.
But these people are leveraging their image and lying to the public effectively, or concealing, their drug use from the public, so that they can sell nothing to people, get money off of it with easy purchases, and do whatever the fuck they want with their lives. And for me, my job as a coach, again, like, I want to connect with people. I want to impact their lives. I want to help them to push through their resistance. And let me tell you, as a coach, doing this thing and sustaining this life and getting, onboarding new customers, finding the people who are really serious about change, that in and of itself is like a radical act of pushing through resistance, because I talk to dozens of people, every month, and the ones who are serious enough, who can take the courage to pay me fair market, right, and to commit to 4 to 6 months of transforming their habits and their lives, man, they are so few and far between, right?
Yeah.
But when you get to them, and when you can't help them, man, it's incredible.
Well, it's like you mentioned, the clientele that you work with, law enforcement, Marines, EMT, stuff like that. These are folks that, typically, you see them, they want it, and not just that, they need it for their profession. It's not like, like we say, we see these influencers on social media and they're doing it for the clicks, they're doing it for the likes, and it's just to like kind of give this look. I mean, I can't, tell you how many folks I see as I scroll through daily. I have the folks that I follow that I see, but then, Instagram and whatnot will kind of put in your feed, people that you don't follow. It's like, you should follow them. And it's like, you're looking at them. It's like, I don't see anything here that is of interest to me. Like, it's like, okay, I see that, you're working out, but really when you look at the caption, it's telling you this is how I got this. And you start swiping through the pictures and it's trying to sell you a program. It's trying to sell you, a supplement. It's trying to sell you a shot. And it's like, dude, can we just be genuine? Can we be authentic? Can you just care and try to make people better without poisoning them? So, again, thank you to, you all as, professionals.
Absolutely, man.
Before we get out of here, I'm going to lighten the tone a little bit here and hit us with 5 rapid fire questions.
Go for it.
Kind of send us out of here. So we're going to kind of cut back to jiu-jitsu a little bit here real quick. And this is when I ask everyone on the rapid fire, gi or no gi?
Both.
I love the answer. Why not both? Let's go with it. Favorite submission?
That's too hard. I can't do that. I love leg locks. I love back triangles. I love arm bars. I can't say there isn't one. No, I love all of it. It's so cool.
What's funny is when you said back triangle, for some reason that was in my mind. I was like, I feel like back triangle. I feel like if this dude gets the opportunity, like, you're in a bad place. And
no, if I can get the back, every time I've secured a back triangle, it's just like, yes, like I did it, right? So I think that is probably like one of the most dominant upper body submissions, if not the most. That or a mounted triangle, right?
Yeah. I've been stuck in the back triangle, and it's never fun. I always feel just so useless at that point. I'm just like, how did we get here?
Dead to rights. Once they lock it in, you're dead to rights, man.
Give me one song on your workout playlist right now.
Let's see. We've got Sleep Token, Jaws.
Love to hear it. Like it. Let's see here. Pre-competition ritual, like something that you have to do is before you go out there.
So when all the negative thoughts come, like I told you, I usually negotiate with myself and say, yeah, there's a kind of a counter flood of conscious, intentional reframe, which is like, you're doing such a good job. You should be so proud of yourself. The younger you would be so proud of you right now.
Love it. That's awesome, dude. And then the last one here, athlete that you most admire in the jiu-jitsu realm.
That's really tough, dude. I hadn't thought about that. In terms of like the people, the person who I really
Yeah.
appreciate as a person, you know, because it's really easy to be a fanboy of anybody who's just super successful. Okay. And so I will say this, and it's kind of a weird answer, but it's probably going to be Majid Hage, because and there's a reason for this. It's because he's won almost as many as he's lost. He's still super good, and he's beaten like really tough top level guys. And his style is like, it's so flowy, and like, you know, he's a surfer, and it's so cool, and it's so relaxed, and yet he's like a killer at the same time. So I love that, all that combination of all those things, I think is like really worthy of emulating.
Nice. I definitely agree that there is kind of a balance there, that you can still be so chill and hit that switch and turn it on when it's time to go. So
100%.
that's awesome. So James, this has been awesome, man. Thank you.
Likewise.
Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, sharing your story. I definitely want to have you on again, because it's just like, as we're talking, I'm like, okay, you know, like I'm kind of in a time bubble right now. So
Yeah.
like, it's like I gotta get my daughter to bed. So I was like, let me, you know, because there's so much more
Sure.
that we have to talk about. But
I'd love that.
before we get out of here, are there any shout outs or mentions that you'd like to leave the listeners with here today?
Yeah, you know, if anybody's interested in having a conversation, seeing more about what I'm about or my service is about, y'all can get at me on Instagram at fight_fit_training. If you prefer Threads, it's the same handle, right? I post a lot of interesting, just conversational value content on Threads that many people enjoy a lot. So if you're into the thinking and the writing, the words, that's there. Facebook too. You know, I'm there just under my name, and so we can provide that as a link or whatever. And yeah, like, don't be afraid to reach out. You know, I'm happy to talk in the DMs or whatever. You have any questions about anything, I'm available.
All right, awesome. I'll be sure to put the links in the show notes and have them available also on social media when we post and everything.
Sweet.
All right. And as always, to the listeners, thank you. If you all have any questions, concerns, criticisms, feel free to reach out. You can find me here at, well, not here, because we're on Spotify right now, or Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening to this. You can find me on social media, though. You can find me at bjj.wiki on Instagram, and also Off the Mats Podcast as well on Instagram. I want to give a big shout out to my crew over there at Nerd Rage Radio. Bobby, Chris, Joe, Marilyn, Phil, Ricky, Tiki, all those guys. We just recorded episode 500 over there this past weekend. And let me tell you, I love those dudes. Like, if it weren't for Nerd Rage Radio, I wouldn't be doing a podcast. So if y'all like it here, thank those guys and go give them a listen. Episode 500 was kind of wild anyway. Like, I don't even know how to describe it. It was a fun time for us, but conversations were a little off the wall. But thank you to those guys, and big shout out to that crew. I also want to give a shout out to my other podcasts. So, you like horror? If you're into scary movies, go check it out. We're currently in the theme of remakes versus originals for 2025, and the next episode coming up, we're going to actually be talking about the 1950s version of The Thing from Another World versus John Carpenter's The Thing, which is the remake. So we're going to have a discussion about that. And we just released The Mist. So that was the last episode. So if you're into scary movies, go check those things out. And, you know, we appreciate it. You can find us on, what was it? Instagram. Sorry. Got distracted there. Instagram. So you like horror, all the words separated by underscores. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, on that. And last but not least, I want to thank our guest here, Mr. James. Hold on. Let me get you, because I ain't messing it up again. I said it perfect before, and then I messed it up on air. I got you here. Deirmendjian.
Yeah.
I had to say it slow. But big shout out and thank you to James. We do appreciate you and you sharing your story. So thank you. And always to the listeners, we love you guys. You know what it is. You guys keep listening, and we're going to definitely keep making these shows. Thank you, everybody, and goodbye.
Deeper with it. Now let me sing a song.